Welcome to the Industrial Talk Podcast with Scott McKenzie. Scott is a passionate industry professional dedicated to transferring cutting-edge, industry-focused innovations and trends while highlighting the men and women who keep the world moving. So put on your hard hat, grab your work boots, and let's go.
All right, once again, thank you very much for joining Industrial Talk, a platform that is completely and solely dedicated to industrial education and celebrating industry professionals all around the world. Because you're bold, you're brave, you dare greatly, you innovate, you solve problems, you collaborate, you're making the world a much better place. That's why we celebrate you on this platform. We're talking cybersecurity. Yes, you're saying to yourself, Scott, cybersecurity. You need to know about it. You need to know how important it is in your life, and it's with Rockwell. A gentleman by the name of Ahmik Hindman, and he knows his stuff. He knows his stuff. The conversation is great. Paper and pencil, let's get it cracking. Yeah. You wanna be digitally connected? You need to focus on that doggone cybersecurity side. Be protected. We need for you to succeed. That's what they're all about at Rockwell. You. Success. Again, why not celebrate? Let's celebrate all these wonderful leaders and professionals. Ahmik, one of them. And you're going to have all the contact information for this gentleman out there on Industrial Talk because you need to connect with him. How about that for a plug? Here's another plug. We have this platform, and it's because we're so dedicated and just passionate about education and the speed at which industry moves, especially today. We need a way of being able to actively educate from the leaders from around the world in all topics in industry so that you can succeed. Industrial Talk is that ecosystem. If you have a podcast, right? Let's say, Scott, I got a podcast, and I've had people talk to me about this. I have a podcast, and it's out on the typical platforms, typical podcast platform, not getting much traction. Industrial Talk. We work very hard to drive individuals and companies to this platform so that they can access the information they need. And it might not just be from me. It might be from other companies that have, found out a solution that they want to share. That's what this is all about. So if you have a podcast, if you have videos, if you have blogs, and you want attention, you want to gain and help educate industry, inspire next generation leadership, Industrial Talk. So talk to me. Go out to industrialtalk.com and say, Scott, I'm interested. We have a podcast. Scott, we have videos. We want to participate in this media ecosystem so that we can get our message out as well as educate the future. Because I'll be frank, we do a poor job at telling our story. We need to do a better job at that. We need to do a better job at inspiring the next leaders and why it's important to be involved in industry and why it is cool and why it is something to pursue with vigor. That's what we need to do. And to do that, we need to educate. And because you're part of the platform, you get to collaborate with all the other participants. Yeah. And I'll take care of all the other stuff. Industrial Talk, if you're saying, Scott, I don't even know how to really edit it. Okay, I'm here. Just ask me. It's important. All right, cybersecurity. Ahmik is in the hot seat. Great conversation. A must, paper and pencil. So enjoy this chat. Ahmik, welcome to Industrial Talk. Thank you very much for finding time in your busy schedule all the way up in Idaho and running some cybersecurity workshops. Is it workshops?
That's correct.
Really?
Yep.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. And yes, listeners, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity because you need to know about it. That's how important cyber is. And I know you're saying to yourself, Scott, you need to. And Ahmik is has mad skills. So we're gonna be enjoying it. So before we get into that, because you have mad skills, give us a little background on who Ahmik is and where you come from.
Yeah, I grew up in the Northwest, north of Spokane, Washington. Went down to Washington State University, got my Bachelor of Science in Double E, and then went to work for Rockwell. So I've been with Rockwell for about 27 years, focused on industrial control systems. So, and then the last kind of 5 really hyper-focused on our networks and cybersecurity products and solutions.
Do you know where Grace Harbor's at?
Yes, yeah.
I built a terminal in Grace Harbor.
Oh, wow.
A bulk liquid terminal. Yeah. And I would fly into Seattle, head south, turn right at Olympia, head toward the coast. Beautiful, beautiful. I like Spokane too. Beautiful stuff. All right. We're going to be talking about everything that we're going to be talking about is going to be cyber related and specifically as it pertains to some standards. Give us just a overview, a quick overview, a primer to these standards that are coming out and why it's important. How is it different? You get the picture on these standards.
Yeah, so there are standards and guidelines, and we've NIST has both. We also have standards like IEC 62443, which are really the holistic, the most holistic industrial control system standard out there. A lot of manufacturers have adopted, a lot of customers have adopted, but that we talk about standards and guidelines, they go back and forth. So NIST references 62443, 62443 references different NIST, standards and controls, and how to secure things. So the one that has been recently out for public comment is a NIST cybersecurity framework. And
for clarification, NIST. That's NIST, and that stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Continue.
That's great. Yeah, and so there's many different standards that NIST has. They've got standards and guidelines. There's one that's called 800-82R3 initial public draft, and it's like a 280 page document going through holistically how to secure, recommendations and guides to secure industrial control systems. That standard also references a NIST cybersecurity framework, and that's the one that is most, it's out for public comment right now. It's supposed to be ratified, I think, by November 3rd of this year. And the big change that was made from the 2.0 standard from the 1.1 is really this adoption of governance and the wrapping around governance around that cybersecurity strategy, and the different policies and procedures that we're trying to implement. We need to get that management buy-in in order to have an effective solution, right? Because for example, today we have. You look at a majority of applications, they don't have an OT in the manufacturing space, an OT patch management strategy. There's not a common disaster recovery strategy. We don't have, a cyber risk management strategy for OT. IT has a lot of the stuff, but oftentimes that doesn't carry down to OT. So, that's the intent of that standard, really to get the common language, get the adoption from the management team. So they define what is tolerable risk, and then we define our controls around that. And make sure we get common adoption throughout the organization.
So we're talking specifically, or in general, this OT-IT merge, because that's you're correct, absolutely right. The OT side has always been, operations, and this is how we roll, and this is what we do, and this is how we keep the wheels turning. But as we become more connected, and as we become more dependent on those controls being connected and the data associated with that, it's imperative that change. And you bring up an interesting point about governance. Does the standard, the draft standard, the 2.0 standard, help manufacturers establish the governance and here are the parameters sort of in general, and then you can sort of customize it to meet your needs?
Yeah, it is, we talk about it as a cybersecurity framework, and it really is that, providing different categories and classifications. And within that, the public document, the 2.0 out for comment, it has references to other NIST documentations where they talk about how do I implement controls, or
Yeah.
what does cybersecurity risk mean? And those get into very specifics on, here's what you should do. So think of this, really, that framework is really just providing a common language of how we reference this, and how we start to classify this. And we need to go through a very methodical process when we're looking at, deploying, controls in a defense in depth manner. And we talk about that, for years. It's, as much as I like a single solution like factory talk security or SIP security, that's just one little aspect. That's down at the application, the device layer, but we need to layer on multiple controls. And those controls are all part of this classification within the NIST of in this case, the protect category. But there's a govern, there's identity, there's protect, there's detect, there's respond, and recover. So those are the really the 6 different categories that are included in the new 2.0 framework.
You rifled through it as I'm going, oh my gosh, these are points that we've got to sort of expand upon, because here's the reality. I'm a manufacturer. It's new for me to be really thinking. I thought IT's dealing with all of the cyber stuff. Let IT deal with the cyber stuff and keep current and whatever that might look. And now, as we begin to go into that OT environment and recognize that that's important, how does you, Rockwell Automation, take me on a journey to be able to begin to embrace these various layers? Walk us through that.
Yeah, so good question. It's typically started with, because we run into manufacturing systems that are, and companies that have been producing product, for 20, 30 years. We've got some very, very, or older than that, and even, in fact, we've even got old control systems that are manufactured 30, 40 years ago that are still controlling processes in place, like a PLC5, for example. So part of the process is going through and assessing what they have, right? Looking at that inventory, building out, understanding what's there, correlating that inventory to the latest vulnerabilities, understanding what controls are in place. Are there firewalls in place? Do they have segmentation between their enterprise zone and the manufacturing zone? Do they have an OT intrusion detection solution, or were they just doing that at the IT side? Do they understand? Right.
In the IT side, just FYI, right. I guarantee you. Go ahead.
Right. So it's basically just, that assessment process is typically where we start to really get an understanding of what they're doing today. And then, understanding how that aligns with the goals of the organization. And then, associating that with dollars that are available to go after and potentially mitigate, in some cases upgrade if they've got legacy equipment that's no longer available, you can't patch it, that type of thing.
So what I hear you saying, if this is correct, when I go through the assessment phase, what do you got? And that's really what it is. And you're able to identify some vulnerabilities. Is it possible for me to say, okay, I've got this amount of money available to help move this business or move this process forward? Can I do it incrementally? Do you sort of categorize or prioritize, saying, don't let that one go, versus, that's okay for now. That's not, but don't,
Yeah, exactly. That's part of that assessment process. So there's something called kind of this crown jewels assessment. So you understand, what is the most critical asset in your facility? And, if I have my air supply for the entire facility go down, and that's, where that system goes down and it affects the entire process. Well, and it has a legacy control system on there that's not protected at all. Well, that's probably going to be one of the ones we're going to want to target, right away. Right. So, most companies don't have, unless it's a greenfield facility where you're starting from scratch and you've got capital, already allocated, it can't come in and do all this all at once. So, definitely we're working with them to identify the most critical assets, kind of build a strategy in place to say, and here's a plan. We'll do this incrementally. We'll address this space. We'll do some segmentation. We'll put in the right products in place, like the switches, so we can monitor and tie that into an OT intrusion detection solution, and then just kind of build upon that.
See, it seems to me that there's a really neat dovetail marriage that can exist between my asset management reliability strategy, because I'm going to have my asset criticality. Hopefully I've got my asset criticality laid out, like that motor's more important than this motor, and so on and so forth. And then be able to overlay that with your assessment of saying, yep, that's an important motor. And if that goes out, it's because, well, whatever it might be, and we're pulling off, it's connected in some way, shape, or form. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's part of that asset strategy and making sure you've got the backup for that program, right? So that's part of the assessment to evaluate. I'm still surprised. I mean, depending on the manufacturer, there are some systems where they don't have an effective backup and change management program. So if that system is infected with ransomware, we've had this happen. Manufacturing's in some cases #1 target for ransomware because of unpatched operating systems and applications. And in several cases, they might have a backup, but they failed to make a backup of the backup, right? If I'm leveraging one of our products called FactorTalk Asset Center, which is a way to check in and check out assets, I can schedule and go perform an upload and insert it in the database. That's a fantastic solution. But if I don't back up my Asset Center database, which is a SQL database, and that gets infected by ransomware, now I got to rebuild everything. And we've had that happen to a couple of customers, unfortunately.
You see, but you're bringing up an interesting point. So it's one thing to provide an assessment of my operations. That's great. It's good. It's necessary. Got to make it happen. But the other side of that coin is sustainable. Is sustaining that effort, right?
Right.
How do you work in the world of change? Excuse me, world of change management to ensure that this is a long-term commitment, this journey. How do you work with that?
Well, so some of that goes back to the requirement on governance. So, we have, if I don't have policies and procedures in place saying, thou shalt use Asset Center to manage your, control system, all your changes, your agnostic check-in and check-out programs, then I'm going to, if I don't have policies and procedures in place, some people will not follow it, right? So having that governance, that management buy-in, saying, here is how we will manage our changes, and then providing visibility in terms of, reporting, and we've had a lot of that integrated, and there's ways to exfiltrate that data and centralize, so I can see, hey, show me what changes have been made from plant 1 to plant 2, my vulnerabilities that are associated with that, and the longevity status of those assets. So, providing that visibility to enforce the governance, the saying, hey, yes, they are following it. I think both of those really kind of go hand in hand to make sure that system is sustainable and maintained.
How do you combat that, having insights into your OT environment and just business as usual, and then things just happen? How do you programmatically have insights into your assets and ensure that the proper firmware, security, whatever it might be? How do you keep current with that?
Well, so one of the best ways to do that is if I'm passively detecting. There's a combination of passive and active scans where I've got an OT specific intrusion detection solution. So Rockwell delivers Clarity, Cisco CyberVision, soon Dragos, and right. So we would deploy that in the OT space where I'm capturing that traffic. I know what is normal activity. We can, there's signature based and heuristic, so we can determine if there's deviations from baseline. If that engineer has never downloaded to that controller before, we'll flag, that'll get flagged. And as part of that, you'll be able to see that OT specific traffic, understand the firmware versions that are being used, and then correlating that to the latest vulnerabilities. So that's probably the best way to do that. Now, there's some cases where I can't actively, passively scan that network and see all those different devices. A prime example is our control logics chassis. It's a chassis based, one Ethernet card. I've got a backplane, and I've got another card. I might have some sub networks there. That data is never traversing that switch where I'm monitoring that. I'm not going to have visibility. So, sparingly, we would do some protocol specific active scans to discover those assets. And so in combination with that, if I've got, good coverage, then I'm going to have ability to stay on top of that firmware, what's out there, and again, correlate that dynamically to the latest vulnerabilities.
You briefly, and we hammered on the assessment side and what to do, and I love it because I always look at the people. I never really, I never stumble on the technology. It's always sort of how you in the world, from my perspective, in the world of manufacturing and cyber, it's always gets down to the people. Can you briefly mentioned it? You rifled through it briefly. It was 7. So take us through those 7 points.
Even as far as the different categories?
Yes, the layers.
So when I present, in fact, I did this morning with a bunch of customers presenting the NIST cybersecurity framework, and we talk about and align that NIST framework to really that attack continuum, that before, during, and after. And within those classification before, it's that really identify and protect. The during is that detect, and the after is respond and recover. And as a wrapper, I like to show it as a wrapper, around that is the governance piece that's part of the 2.0 framework. NIST, if you take a look at theirs, they put it kind of in the center, but I really think it really should be on the outside. And so in my infographic that I use, I show that as really the outside in managing the policies and procedures that support those different areas. And so and then there's different controls within each one of those areas. Yeah.
So we've got before, during, and after, and under before you ID and protect.
Right.
During is governance.
No, during I could detect.
Okay.
So I'm detecting it.
Right. Yeah. And then
after
respond and recover.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Question I always get that is always if I'm a manufacturer and I've got my policies and things are in place and I'm properly protecting, then I'm detecting or protecting and detecting. Is there a way that I can sort of in a community way to be able to share, like, hey, this is sort of a new thing that we saw over here. This is how we, recovered from it. This is where do you get what I'm saying? Is there a body that says, okay, that's new? Because it always changes.
Right.
Always changes.
And so there are different, groups out there that provide that as a service, the threat intel to say, here's the tactics and techniques and procedures that this ransomware group is utilizing. And by the way, they're attacking, this specific, they're going after critical infrastructure and targeting, energy or food and beverage. And so that we can incorporate that threat feed into the protection systems and detection systems so that you can be alerted based upon some tactics and techniques that you're starting to see, and see you can attribute that to that specific group and hopefully mitigate that.
So what I see is a picture that we have in place, strategies around before, during, and after. We have the systems in place to be able to be more proactive, have that passive and active assessment or identification within your operations. Mm-hmm. Now, the role of the governance body. What are some of the rules? So saying, hey, you come together and it's like everything's fine. Everything's fine. We've got everything in place. Everything's identified. Or take us through a little role play on the governance. What they do?
Yeah. So the governance NIST classifies those in different categories. They start with this organizational context and risk management strategy. There's a supply chain piece of that. there's roles and responsibilities and authority, and then then it comes down to the policies and procedures and oversight. How are we going to enforce this? So it really depends on what we're talking about. If we're looking at patch management, which is what I tell customers, hey, we got to segment the networks between IT and OT, manage and monitor that, restrict the data flow, and deploy a patch management strategy. Come up with a patch management strategy, and those in combination would mitigate a lot of the ransomware that we're seeing affect the control system. So that patch management requires a policy and procedure and process. How are we going to do that in the OT space? Because patch management is totally different in the OT space than IT. And we talk about, right? So, typical IT, you have the CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, availability, and that's reversed on the OT and manufacturing side, right? Availability, integrity, and confidentiality. So we have critical systems. Some are life safety systems that have to run 24/7, 365, right? You can't just deploy a patch on that. So now I got to deploy some mitigating controls around that. So you have to have that kind of baked into that policy and procedure and develop a patch management strategy specifically for OT. So that's where that kind of governance comes into play. Right now, oftentimes we see that there's not, it's really up to that engineering manager or maybe that person that's responsible for maintaining that, how they're going to protect that. And that's not going to be consistent from facility to facility or even within the facility, right?
For lack of a better term, if I didn't have my headphones on, my ears would be bleeding.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot, but it's manageable. Meaning, if I find myself aligning with Rockwell Automation in this particular conversation, the only way I know that I'm going to be able to effectively, manage what's happening out there in the cyber world, I have to find trusted cyber experts. Right. There's no other way, and keep me, manufacturing guy, doing what I do best, and that's manufacturing. Right. And allow the technology and the policies and procedures to do what they do best, and that's keeping my business up and running and protected. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
And it could be incrementally, right? It doesn't have to be big bang. So
that's correct.
I don't know, man. This is good stuff.
It's a challenge. And
no. Go ahead.
To that point, the oftentimes we see the OT side, if the company's big enough, hiring somebody specifically to manage security and be also that liaison internally between the OT and IT side. Sometimes that expertise comes from the enterprise side, and then they have to basically be taught OT and what's different and how it's unique. But even that one person, even though they're allocated and assigned to that, there's just so much to know. They got to have to basically rely on outside sources to help.
So I was just going to say, this is sort of a really clear example of a managed services sort of relationship, because if I brought somebody on board and that individual probably has the chops that are necessary for, today, it's the dynamics of the market where if it's a Rockwell Automation, you get all that latest and greatest information where I might be just an island. So it's a great managed services model.
Right. And we do that for customers, regardless of whether they're Rockwell or we manage other assets that are not Rockwell. So rarely is it all Rockwell. I mean, in some cases, like I said, on a greenfield facility, sometimes, we're working closely with the customer and they want to standardize, minimize spares, minimize training requirements. Then then majority of that facility is Rockwell. But oftentimes you have a mix, right? So we have to be able to support that.
And, you're not going to let them hang. You're like, hey, I'm sorry. We noticed that 20% of your asset base is Rockwell, and you're on your own for the 80. No, that's not gonna fly in any situation. All right, as we wrap up, somebody's listening out there. They want to know more about NIST. They want to know more about how to properly protect their business? How do they get a hold of you?
I'm on LinkedIn. They can reach out. That's probably the easiest way is just find me on LinkedIn and reach out that way. And then we can touch base and chat and provide additional contact information there. But if you just do a search for Ahmik, it's Ahmik, last name Hindman, Hindman. You'll find me on LinkedIn. And
well, fear not, listeners. I'm going to have Ahmik's LinkedIn link out on Industrial Talk, so you don't give me an excuse that you can't get a hold of him, because it's out there. Industrial Talk, big time. You were absolutely wonderful. Love the conversation. There's a lot more to be chirped about cyber. I don't know how you keep up with it. I don't know. And again, for me personally, if I'm a manufacturer, I really just want that to be taken care of, and that I can sleep at night knowing that my assets are properly protected, and I don't have too much. There's no friction on my end. That's all I care about.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, listeners, we're going to wrap it up on the other side. We're going to have all the contact information for Ahmik out on Industrial Talk. Stay tuned. We will be right back.
You're listening to the Industrial Talk Podcast Network.
Kaboom. Ahmik, right there. Reach out to him. His LinkedIn stat card is out on industrialtalk.com. So make sure that you do the right thing. And on your to-do list, reach out to Ahmik. Rockwell is the company. Yeah, Rockwell. Absolutely. All right, again, let me just reiterate this. We need to tell our story. We need to tell our story in a way that is engaging. Industrial Talk is the platform. You have a podcast and you want greater traction to it, Industrial Talk. You have videos, you want people to watch it, Industrial Talk. Be a part of the ecosystem, this media ecosystem. It's easy. You just reach out to me and say, Scott, I want to be a part of it. There. That's the process. Nothing more, nothing less. Then we start working together, and then we start to gain that traction that you need. Be bold, be brave, dare great. Hang out with Ahmik. Change the world. We'll have another great conversation shortly.